All right, here I am. Yay. Okay, you guys. I've given you an abject apology already. I really don't know what else to do other than that. But I had the information screwed up, and it was totally my fault. So what we have here is a quick presentation, and I'm going to talk to you guys, and it's going to be quick because we don't have time, about freelancing in the 80s and 90s into 2000. I freelanced doing art for gaming for 20 years. I had come to San Francisco from Chicago, where I got my first job. I graduated from Art Center in 1975, which is an art school. And I've been running so much that my mouth is so dry, I can't get it to work. And I graduated from Art Center in LA, and went to Chicago to a group that was an illustration group there. Worked there for a year, came back. Am I live or am I even on? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. 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 I can take this one. Now I've got this connection going on. Somebody want to help me with that?
Yeah, hold on a second. Voice is loud.
Yeah, it's not like we've got a huge group here, right? Which is good. You're real fans, so I appreciate it. Test. Is that? Can you hear me okay?
No, I got it.
You can't hear me at all.
He's got to turn it on.
I've got to turn this on.
No, I turned it on.
Am I good?
Voice
Yeah. Okay, so I graduated from Art Center in 1975, worked in Chicago for a year, and then I went to, decided that I wanted to come back to the West Coast. So I came back to San Francisco. All my friends said, why are you doing that? You know, there's nothing going on in San Francisco. There's not much industrial, you know, there's a few agencies, there's nothing happening there. And I thought, well, you know, I just want to live on the West Coast. That's what I want to do. And so I decided to come back and try to make a go of it. And about the time I arrived, Silicon Valley happened to arrive with me and begin to expand and become more and more important in our lives, and that generated a great deal of illustration work. And so I was doing illustrations for companies like Intel, Varian, and doing a lot of technical type of illustrations, as well as advertising illustration for packaging. And I was contacted then by a couple of gentlemen by the name of Carlson, who were founding a company called Broderbund. How many of you have heard of Broderbund? Okay, so I did their first 4 games, and they had I think for the first game they had $500 to spend, and we did a nice game for them. I can't remember the sequence of which game it was, but that was my first game, and I followed that with the next 3 games that they put out, and Broderbund actually grew to be a pretty profitable company. But like many of the gaming companies, it finally did succumb and is no longer with us. But early on, it went under. But it was a kind of a launch pad for me with regard to doing illustration for video game covers. In the end, I wound up doing almost 90. I did over 95 covers total. So now, you guys know this piece of art, right? How many of you hate this piece of art? You can be honest. I'm the illustrator. It's okay. There's just some. Okay. How many love this piece of art? Okay, it's about even. And that's what I found is that in my booth, this is my best-selling print, is that people really do love the Mega Man 2 art, even though it was completely wrong, as we all know now. You know, and I tried to argue that, well, in Japan they didn't know Mega Man in the way he came to be known, but it turns out that wasn't accurate either. I didn't even know that, but evidently in '82 there were images in Japan being used of Mega Man with a cannon on his arm, you know, and being this tough little guy that we all fell in love with later. So this was a marketing faux pas, and as a paid illustrator, I tended to do what I was told to do, and so they gave me this project, and they said, put the pistol in his hand, and I did. And we produced this piece of art, and then they sat on the piece of art for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, and in which time somebody could have spoken to somebody, you would think. And then, you know, nothing happened, and they printed bazillion boxes, and there you go. So, you know, my most well-known piece of art, unfortunately, is the result of a real screw-up. Let me, since I'm talking from right here. Oh, I had this grand vision that I was going to be walking through the audience and waving my hands and talking, you know, and then all of a sudden, somebody was at my booth saying, "Dude, you're on." And I wasn't. So, okay, so we go to turn that back on. Okay, so this is all I need now. So you know this piece of art, right? Okay, well, please tell me, how many of you feel like my art was better than this? Yeah, oh, okay. Thank you. That's all I wanted to know. This right here is the reason why I did so many video game covers, all right? If you look at this map, you will see a lot of red dots. Red dots all represent companies and or design firms. And you can read the names. I mean, there's Activision, there's Atari, down low, there's Data East, Electronic Arts, 360 Pacific, moving on up above, Broderbund was up in the Bay Area, up higher. And then surrounding that were any number of advertising and design firms, all of which were catering to the business. And the yellow dot was where my studio was. So it was like ground zero for let's do gaming. And so that right there, I think, represents the reason why I did so much video game art. Is that I was handy. I did a lot of different techniques. I did airbrush, I did color wash, I did line work, I did design, looking illustrations, you name it, and I was capable of doing at least a reasonable rendition of it. And so, and everybody the pot was boiling at that point so vigorously that there was a lot of work to be done by illustrators, and it was done. One thing I'd like everybody to think about is the fact that as an illustrator, we covet our finishes. In other words, we do a piece of art, and it's what we love. We fall in love with it. When the client demands we change things, obviously we have to, suck it up and make changes. But the point is that we have a finish at the end of the day, or at the end of the 3 days, or if we've worked for 4 straight days to get an illustration done. There's a physical, tangible object in your hands that you deliver to a client. That was the world I knew and the world I started out in. What's happened since, halfway through my career, it was required of me that I now put down all my paint and my pencils and everything else, and I started doing work digitally and delivering the art digitally, which gave the client much more flexibility in making changes. Frankly, that's what it comes down to. Gave them a lot more latitude in making changes, but it came to be that over a very short period of time, I would say something like 5 years, there was actually a situation where if I'd walked in the door with a painting, an agency wouldn't know what to do with it. The kids that were working there would simply not know, well, what am I supposed to do with this? It's like, don't you have a thumb drive for me? I'm looking for a file. And so I was forced to go into Photoshop, and from then on, that's the kind of work I've pretty much done. So I do my work digitally now, but I work traditionally. And I think the kind of outburst of work that was done for gaming was sort of a last gasp of old world illustration, where actual physical paintings were done and were treasured by people and are collected by people now. And everyone should understand that if they have an opportunity, for instance, to somehow get a hold of a piece of actual video game art that's hand done, that they would do wise to get a hold of it and hold it, because the world will realize that I love digital, but it's just data. When you hand it to somebody, you're just giving them data. The idea that anybody can print it out and anybody can do anything they want with it. In fact, so the idea that there's a physical, tangible object at the end of what an illustrator is doing is pretty much over with. So that's a point that is important to me, that you guys understand that what you loved during your youth as gamers was the end of the road for many, many illustrators who were used to working traditionally. And it was an important phase. So that said, let's go to hopefully into the next slide here. This is the sort of work that I did as an illustrator of all sorts. I worked for all kinds of clients, the Baltimore Sun, for instance, Kawasaki, Dolby, Varian. There's a number of Hewlett Packard. There's a number of companies up there represented up there. Anheuser-Busch. That's always been part of the palette of what I've done. But I also did video games in a big way during that period of time in the 80s and 90s. This is a quick look at 50 of the games I did, and I put it together as a print that I make, and you can see the breadth of what was called for. I did things that were military oriented. I did things that were fun. I did Bonk 3. I did combat scenes. I did guerrilla war. I did POW. Tengen Tetris. I did a ton of games of all different sorts, and I have to say there's not a single game that I did that I didn't enjoy doing. I mean, to say that you can do the one thing in your life that you love doing and get paid for it, that's just a blessing. And so I feel great that I've always had that opportunity, and I feel great that I've always had that response from people. And the thing that's important to me now that I'm 69 years old is the idea that there are you guys out there who remember what I did. Because most illustrators at the end of their career, even if they were working for top tier companies, you know, who remembers their work? Because at the end of the day, all of our work winds up pretty much in the landfill. And so, you know, to suddenly understand that out here at this show, there were a lot of people that really cared about the art that I did, you know, is really important to me, and it means a lot. And so, I'm sorry I screwed up here in front of all of you and didn't make it on time. We'll definitely do question and answer. I'm going to try to go through this as quick as I can. I also did magazine covers for different magazines and for GamePro and PC Games Magazine and interior illustrations for them. I think probably somewhere in the range of maybe 200 or so pieces of physical art. The way we did things when we were working was, and I'm moving as fast as I can because I think you're probably going to have questions, is there are 3 phases to doing an illustration. First phase is you go in to see the client, they show you the product. You sit down with the client, you sketch. You sketch very roughly, and you give them a rough sketch. They agree on the direction. Then you take that sketch home. If it's going to involve realism, then you have to go out and get reference. You have to shoot your friends. You have to do whatever it takes to get a realistic reference to be able to utilize when you're doing the illustration. If you want to convince someone that this is at least somewhat real. If you're doing a cartoon, it's completely beside the point. If you're doing Bonk 3, come on, it's like I can draw that. But if you're doing, a guy trying to save a scientist out of a swamp with an enemy army, horde behind it, then you're going to need reference. So. We're going to look at bad dudes here for the initial staging sketch idea. You may remember the game. This was Bad Dudes. You can see it was somewhat realistic, but it had a lot of sort of strange things going on. Like there's a ninja that's getting ready to leap from a helicopter, even though he's like 100 feet in the air, and those kinds of things. People, that's Hollywood. That's gaming. So what I did for them in the way of a rough sketch was this. And when I'm sitting with the art director and doing the rough, it's going very quickly. So usually I will go ahead and take this home, their very rough sketch, take it home and give them something like this right away and get right back to them. Now, right away in 1980 meant, or 1985 or 1989 meant, okay, I'm going to do this sketch, and I'm going to fax it to you. How many remember faxes? Do any of you remember faxes? Okay, so then we would fax these things to people. How many do not know, for the life of them, what a fax is? Oh, good, okay. I'm doing good. So let's talk about shooting reference. Okay, so let's say the item that you're going to be working on wants to be a little bit realistic. You're going to need to shoot figures. So we would take one another's step in for each other to pose for positions for various different kinds of illustrations that we were doing. In my studio at 1045 Sansom on North Beach, where I was for 40 years, I had typically about 4 other guys and girls with me that were working, and we were all independent contractors. We all had our own clients. And yet we still were very close friends. We would trade jobs. When I was too busy, I'd give a job to somebody else. When they were too busy, they'd give a job to me, or they would recommend me for it. And so we would be in this position where I got a Carl, and Carl Buell was one of the greatest wildlife guys I've ever met as far as doing wildlife art. And is this historic, I mean, he's this heroic sort of looking guy. I was so lucky that he was part of our group. And then there was me. I was kind of ordinary looking skinny kid. And then there were, a couple of women. And then I would go out in the street and I would solicit strangers. I swear to God. I would go out if I needed something in particular, and I'd walk up Sansom Street towards Broadway. And if I passed somebody that looked good, I would say, "Excuse me, my name is Mark Erickson," and I would make sure that I had one of my mailers to show them that I was really an illustrator. And I would say, I need to shoot something for an illustration. I'm really in a hurry, and if you wouldn't mind taking your lunch hour and just posing for me in your suit, which looks so great, you mind being a businessman for me for 20 minutes, and I'll give you $50. And people would do it, and they would come up to my studio. And they pose for me, and I'd shoot the pictures, and I'd get what I needed, and I'd give them the $50, and they'd be happy, and I'd be happy. That stuff went on all the time. So you can imagine that sort of, this is the kind of world that we were working in. Again, fortunately, because it was so much fun. So here's the image that I want to talk to you about in shooting reference. This is a complex image, as you can see. You don't want to worry too much about the hind ship, gunship up there, or the train falling off the rails or any of that. You go find reference for that in your what was called our morgue, which was a collection of photographs that we'd cut out of magazines and filed for us to refer to. But I needed that figure, those 3 figures in the foreground. I had to have them. So I had a guy that I knew in an armory for National Guard down in Palo Alto. And so I called the guy and I said, "Hey, can we come down and use some of your weapons? I need to pose something for somebody, And they said, "Yeah, we're not running anything today." And so we went down to Palo Alto and we did a shoot. And this is some of the results of the shoot. And if you look, you can see, for instance, we're standing out on a main drag, near a main drag, in Palo Alto, doing these things. And this is just a couple of the shots. You'll see that the shot in the lower right, my studio mate Robert Evans, a fantastic illustrator in his own right, and Carl, God bless him, standing tall there, wielding his M16, which the M16 was a plastic M16, it was mine. I didn't ask them for an M16 at the Armory. But they did give me a bazooka. And we used the bazooka, as you can see in that figure in the upper right. And we go back, you'll see where, one more time, where these things fit in. You can see in the upper right, there's the bazooka man. And here we have our scientists being rescued by these guys. And so that was very part and parcel of what happened when you went out and shooting reference. Let's move to the next slide if we can. Okay, so finish line sketch. So this one is from the Akari 3 of the Rescue, which was a game some of you may know. How many know Akari 3 of the Rescue? Okay, good, thank you. Show of hands. How am I doing on time, guys? Somebody shout at me when I only have 5 minutes left. Okay?
It's only 58.
Okay. Okay. What do we got?
We got about 17 minutes.
Okay. So there's Akari 3. You may remember that. And what I needed to do with Akari 3 was do the line art. Now this line art is based on photography. I went out and did shots of the thing, and you can see here the call-outs that I got from the art director, and I think that's one of the things that's really fascinating about this particular thing was a fax, and I found it in my files about 3 months ago or 4 months ago or so, and it was so faded that I could barely see it. And I went online, do it yourself, restoring old faxes, and I dipped it in lemon juice and some other things, and did exactly what they told me. And I managed to save this much of this, and then of course I copied it. And so it is a good example of what happens when you send something to a client. I'm going to climb down on the floor for just a second here. Now, I'm going to ask if, yeah, back up. If I'm down on the floor and I'm talking like this, can everybody hear me okay? Yes. In the back? I want to talk just a little bit about the instructions on this particular piece. So as you can see, we've got sketch number 1. And the changes that they had in that relative to this was that the guy looks too earnest. You know, oh, he looks too earnest. Okay, that's no problem. Can we change him? He has an ammunition belt here. Rather not have a belt of ammunition, let's put a magazine in there. So obviously then here's the magazine. You know, this kind of tank is good, but I left out an explosion up here. And then this right here is where the title was going to go. And they already had the box designed so that I knew where the title was going to be when I began the art. So then what I did was I built enough bleed out to create a piece of art that's going to allow them to put in all of the crawlers and all of the titling and all of the little doodads that they're going to have. All of the intrusions, what we call intrusions, that they were going to have on the art. And so down at the bottom, finally, and I don't know if you can read this, he says, I said to back to him, Brent, I put the guy in the tank, put the chopper up, remove the one sky completion, put over the other sky explosion, put it blah, 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 down the line. All the things that he needed me to do for that illustration. And then he said, good, let's go. Let's go with it. And then I went ahead and created the illustration based on that. So we have the 3 phases that went into that illustration. And again, I'll go back so that we can look at that one more time. And you can see where these things, how these things turned out, and what his input had for me, and what input, you know, I managed to hang on to had for me. And then you can also see the intrusions. With the prints that I've created from large-scale transparencies that I shot myself when I did the art. And so I have a library of those pieces, and that's why I'm able to blow my art up big and show it to people the way it looked the day I delivered it to the client. But most cases, this is what you have to work with. You know, you don't know what's going on behind the title for the art, or whether there's something back there, whether it got covered, and so on and so forth. So those are the basic parts of what went on when we were doing these pieces. This is an example of the shots that I took for the figures that were in the piece. So as you can see, this gentleman down here in the lower right hand was an Asian body stunt double at the time, who somebody referred me to, and he went on to have a great career in Hollywood on some major films that were filmed. This fellow here in the center lower part was the one that was looking too earnest for the for the art director. That was a weird line to say. Your guy looks too earnest. I didn't know what to do with that. Then over on the right, you can see the hand where the hand grabbed my son, who is in the upper right-hand corner. That's my son posing for me with his older brother as a terrified person that's just about to be captured. And I'm yelling at him, you know, yelling at my young son, you know, come on, you're scared. You're scared. Come on, let's go. Let's see. I need some. And we're all laughing, though, you know, which made it tough because she's supposed to be scared and he's cracking up. But you know what? And then there's the other fighting punches, and that's Carl getting punched. And if you look at Carl, you can see he's got great features. He could have been an actor, you know. He was a semi-pro ball player. He was just a great studio mate. And so this is kind of emblematic of the life that I led, you know, of doing the art that I did, and how much I appreciated it, and how much fun it was. There wasn't a time when anybody was really down in the dirt, and so then the final phase of this for the client would be a color rough. And so the color roughs here, for instance, this is for a game called that probably nobody ever heard or ever saw. It was one of his favorite pieces of art that I did. It was for the Lynx system. Who remembers the Lynx system? Okay, good. So I did four games for them, for the Lynx system, and this was Steel Talons. And if you look at the box up in the upper right, Steel Talons was a logo that I created for the game. And in many times, like Mega Man 2, I did Mega Man with a pistol, but they asked me to create the title, and I also created the title and was paid for that. Typically, I would get about $1,500 to $2,000 for a title, and many times I did titles for the games that I did. It was very common. So you can see the color rough over there was done. Basically, I would sketch it very rapidly, small. I would Xerox it, I would take markers, and I would create color on it with markers, and then I would either airbrush on it or paint on it as needed. Okay? And then, let's work our way out of this. So here's a color rough that I did for Steel Empire. That color rough again is pretty. My version was dark at first because I thought everything was being lit from underneath. But the client reacted, I think rightfully, to say, I want a huge bonfire down there and I want everything lit. So it doesn't matter if it's at nighttime or whatever it is, they want everything lit. So I had to light the top of the Zeppelin, I had to light the bottom of the Zeppelin with the fire, and so I had to change it quite a bit. But I have to admit, it made a much more entertaining cover. Many times what the client brings to you is an improvement if you're willing to accept that it's an improvement. But many times it's like, give them a pistol and then you're like, then you're in trouble. So when to listen to them and when not to listen to them is a good question. And so that's how I'm going to wrap up. So I want to leave time enough for some questions if you guys have questions. So Mega Man was obviously my biggest disaster when I actually carried on with my career. How about let's go back to this. Can you hear me? So when I went back to my career and sans the video game work, because it had reached a point where where basically what was in the game was more than sufficient to make a cover out of, and was wonderful stuff. The animation was so fantastic that they didn't need us anymore. And so that was the end of it, but my career continued on. And so it wasn't until around 2011 that I started to look back at gaming at all. I had totally forgotten about it. And I thought, well, maybe I'd done 15 or 20 in my head. I thought, yeah, I did some games. I think I did maybe 15 or 20. So I found a couple of old images, and I went on to Moby Games, and I said, hey, I'm a guy that did some games, and they said, do you think anybody would be interested in this art? And they came back to me and said, wow, this would be great. A lot of people would be interested in the art. So I started looking, and over the last 5 years, I've realized that I did 95 pieces of art. I didn't even remember. And so including this issue of, because what I did was, in order to start that entire process, was to go online one day when I saw a little notation on the web about the 50 worst games ever created for video gaming. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I've done a few games. I'll open that up. And there was Mega Man 2, my piece of art, leading the 50 worst pieces of art ever created for gaming. Now, I could have quit at that point, right? But I didn't, I said, well, wait a minute, that wasn't my fault. And so that's the story of Mega Man. But I did go on with my career, and even today I'm a freelancing illustrator, and I do a lot of work. And I just finished a large project, as some of you know, for Crystal Cruise Lines, a series of 16 watercolors that are 20 inches wide, each of complex images like the Stockholm Harbor with a cruise ship in it. 19 illustrations that I did in 14 days. So that's very typical of the sort of thing that you find happening when you're doing advertising art. Okay, so let's please, first of all, one more time, I'm so sorry I was late. This was unforgivable, but I thought I was supposed to be here at noon. Okay, that said, do I have any questions? I'll go here first because he had his hand up earlier.
I had just asked if you did the logos.
Okay, so many of the logos I did do. Okay. Yes.
Hi there. What work did you do for 360 Pacific?
360 Pacific was a strategy group that did a lot of military stuff. And I had been in the service. I spent 6 years in the Army. and am a combat veteran. And they called me in to do some work for them that involved, I think their first one was Omaha Beach, and they had a strategy game for that. And I wound up doing a series of, I think, 4 pieces for what they called the V for Victory series, all of which involved, combat arms. And then they were going to do a War in the Pacific series, but they ran out of money. And that was very common. I did a whole series of illustrations for a company called Data Age, and they did video games. They did Journey Escape. I don't know if anybody remembers Journey Escape or Data Age, but they went under when they owed me about $8,000, and I never got that. So those kinds of things happen in advertising as well. When you do that much art, you figure 10% wastage. You're probably doing okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any? Yes, sir.
Do you have a favorite subject matter to illustrate?
I enjoy aviation illustration. I've done I've done I think about a half a dozen paintings for the Air Force Art Collection, and I did a number of flight type images for gaming. I did Tengen's Afterburner and a number that involved aircraft. One of the biggest regrets I have about our gathering here today is the fact that I had 4 or 5 originals that I wanted to bring in here and let everybody see, and some color roughs that I wanted everybody to be able to walk up and look at. So please come by the booth and I will show you those things. I have those pieces here. A couple of them are a UN squadron. I have a Afterburner, and then I have other things. I've got, I can't remember them because I couldn't remember the time I was supposed to be here. But the problem is that I just couldn't set them up, even though I have 3 easels hidden behind that curtain that these guys don't even know about. That I was going to come in here at 11:55 and I was going to put it all up. I'm sorry. So please come by the booth and I'll show you the originals. And we can look at those and look at the color roughs too. Okay? Any questions in the back that I missed? No hands raised there? Okay, well please go ahead and speak up. Okay. Yes.
One more question, actually.
Right.
What about the legal area about selling the originals?
Well, that is an interesting question because I have so few of them, and whether people have them and are selling them to one another now, I would suspect that the pathways to investigate that sort of thing are so tangled at this point that it really wouldn't be an issue. I don't think anybody needs to be nervous if they own a piece of video game art that Atari is suddenly going to show up at their door and demand their art back. There were many purchase orders in which I made the declaration that I was going to retain the title to that art, where I just forgot about it and went on to the next job, and the company kept the art. The companies also destroyed a great deal of art. There were purges, there were buyouts, they were buying one another out, they were going broke, and there were times when they would basically just have to suddenly shut down, and they would literally throw art away. They would just haul it out to the dumpsters in the back, and that would be that. That happened one time at Atari, that my friend Robert, who is the scientist being rescued that you saw here, actually got a call from somebody. I was on a fly fishing trip, and I didn't get the word, but he drove to Atari and found them throwing stuff away and clawed through the dumpster and got 3 or 4 of his pieces. So this is part of the tragedy of what happened to some of that art. But you will see more and more of it, I think, come to the surface over the next few years. I think that people will recognize what they have, not just in gaming, but in any advertising, aspect. I think you will find that future generations will kind of cherish those actual physical artifacts, if you want to call them that, of almost any campaign. Probably most specifically gaming, and maybe movie posters. And we know that comic art is amazingly, resilient and valuable. So I think you'll find that the end of that road and that gap that I had to cross in the middle of my career was a big deal that people didn't pay attention to when it was happening. But it is, the reality now is that people are only producing data. They're not producing images that are tangible. Now, on the last note, that means I didn't have to collect sales tax. Because if I gave somebody a painting, I had to get 8.5% or 8.75 or whatever county we were in. I had to get sales tax out of that guy or out of that company. But once we went digital, no sales tax. They don't like that at the State Board of Equalization, but it's true. All right? Nothing else? Thank you. Oh, okay, here we go.
Sorry.
No.
How often did you get to see gameplay of of games that you were illustrating?
I had to see it every time. I had to see it. I would sit. They would put the beta version on, or whatever the production version was, and they would call me in, and I would sit down with the marketing guy and with a young man or a young woman who would play it. And because I couldn't play, I was 30 years old. I wasn't a gamer, and so I couldn't play the games that I was illustrating. And so I would sit down. I mean, obviously, you're not going to have your illustrator sit down and get killed in the first, over and over and over trying to show them the game. So that's how I would see the game. But I had to see the game every time, because otherwise there was no cerebral stuff going on. I don't think anybody ever explained a game to me over the phone and actually had me do a game that way. Every time I went and watched someone play the game, which was actually the crux of the problem with this guy. Was we couldn't see enough of his hand. There weren't enough pixels there. For the rest of us idiots to figure out that he had a cannon there. So, okay, all right, we good? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for waiting for me. Oh my God, thank you.